Connors, and the book is The Splendor of Cuba 450 Years of Architecture and Interiors. Welcome to the program, sir.
Thanks, Barbara. Appreciate that.
Thank you so much for being on the air with us. And is this your first time at the Miami Book Fair?
No, I actually have been here before and know Mitch Kaplan and know the work they do and admire them all for all the hard work that they've been able to pull off here.
Well, I appreciate all the work that goes on there, and Lynn has been so fantastic in getting the guests lined up and in their proper places for me today. And we're talking about this fantastic collection of photographs from Cuba. And my first question, of course, when I opened it was, how did you get access to all of these places?
Barbara, I can't tell you that. No, I'm just kidding. It was not easy, though. And there were places, in fact, that we were denied access to. It would have to, we took each place, whether it was a private home, a protocol house, a government office, a museum. Um, we took each one on an individual basis, and we had to basically do something different and go through and jump through different hoops for every different one. For instance, the U.S. Intersection chief's residence, the residence of the British ambassador, the residence of the Swiss ambassador, and then different museums. Some of the museums were going under having restoration. Some of the homes had been closed, and they're just every one. There was a different set of circumstances.
And your expertise is in Caribbean antiques.
Caribbean decorative arts and architecture is what I specialize in.
Okay. And when did you first travel to Cuba?
That was in 1998. I was doing my first book, which it was called Caribbean Elegance, and I had broken the book down in five chapters for the five different countries that colonized the West Indies: England, Spain, Denmark, Holland, and France. And to really complete the Spanish chapter, I had to go to Cuba. So it was by default that I went, but as soon as I traveled there, I realized how important a country it was in the sense of its decorative arts and architecture.
As you were traveling around to do this book, how long did it take you to do all the photographs?
Well, first of all, I used one principal photographer, a fellow by the name of Brent Weinbrenner,
Mm-hmm.
and but I did use three other photographers. You have to realize that Cuba is 750 miles long,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a big island, and it's not as easy to get around as one might think. And the fact is that it's less than 100 miles from the U.S., but we don't realize that on Cuba, every architectural style that has been that exists in the last 500 years, there are examples of it on Cuba: Romanesque, Renaissance, Baroque, Rococo, Neoclassical, Beaux-Arts, Art Nouveau, Art Deco, Modernism. They're all there. So, and you can't say that about any other place in the Western Hemisphere. So this is a very, very special island.
One of the things that caught my eye in the description was, unlike the United States, you don't find the Dunkin' Donuts, the McDonald's, the strip malls have, where we in America, we've torn down a lot of communities to build these malls and these massive, strip malls and Starbucks. Um, so a lot of the preservation was just by default because they don't have that type of mindset toward development or urban development the way we have in the United States.
And that's true. And what development there is, or what development I've seen on the island, it's not insensitive at all either.
Mhm.
There's a sensitivity towards the island's history and patrimony. So I have to hand it to the folks, the people that are in charge of this type of conservation of patrimony that's going on the island. That there is a consciousness of their history there.
Mhm. This book is broken down into different eras. Um, when you decided to create these sections, did you then, is there a central catalog of the types of buildings where you would, like I would do, go to my local library and say, can you can you direct me to where I can find such and such a architecture? How did you locate these places to be able to create these sections in your book?
Well, I did a lot of scouting,
Mhm.
years of scouting. I
Mhm.
mean, the first book, Caribbean Elegance, we were there. Um, we're looking for the very best, and then the second book I did was called Cuban Elegance. So we spent another 2 years there, and then I did a book with Rizzoli a couple of years ago called Caribbean Houses. So it was an education by osmosis,
Mhm.
by experiencing the island and then turning a corner and discovering, a fantastic building that was not that had not been cataloged at all.
Mhm.
So we were doing some primary source research there, and these books that I've been doing are considered by some as primary source research.
Is there tourism to places like the places that I see in this book? Do they have tours of some of the buildings, or are they all privately owned for the most part?
No, there are most of them are privately owned, but there are, for instance, this beautiful. Let's just talk about the cover of the book. That one picture on the cover of the book that
Mhm.
you see, that was a private home at one time, and has been made into a museum. It's in the city of Trinidad, which is on the southern coast of Cuba. So that was a perfect example of a sugar baron's home, a 19th century home, early 19th century home that has been turned into a like a house museum. In other words, it's a museum that shows the house as it was when it was being lived in at that time.
Okay. As and there's an influence from America, from the United States, in the architecture in Cuba also.
There is, but you don't really see that until the 20th century.
Mhm.
After the Spanish Cuban American War, America's intervention in the turn of the 20th century, then the 2 years of American occupation. And then after that, from about 1917 until the 1930s, they have a period called the Dance of the Millions. And there was a lot of money uh, brought in from North America at that time, and then also architectural influence towards modernism and traditionalism at that point too.
When most people think of Cuba, we think of Fidel Castro because he's been the face of Cuba for so long, many generations. Um, during his time of control, was there an effort to preserve historic spots or buildings, or did you find more decay? How when you went to take the photographs?
Well, I call it, and I've coined this phrase in the book, preservation by neglect.
Okay.
There has been a neglect of a great deal of what I would consider historically significant architecture. But there has also been a great deal of preservation, conservation, and restoration of historically significant architecture. So where that stands on the scale, Barbara, whether there's more good than more preservation than neglect, I don't know. But
Okay.
obviously, this goes on in every country,
Sure.
and it, as it does here in the United States. So I mean, we're in Miami now, and we can go down to South Beach and see how people have restored the Art Deco period buildings and made hotels out of them and one thing or another. And that's the same thing that's going on in Cuba, but they're going at a slower pace than what we would see here in the United States.
Is there a part of the United States that reflects Cuban architecture? If we went to a city in the United States, would we see something similar to what you found in Cuba?
No. The
Nowhere.
answer is no.
Okay.
It's a simple no. Because in Cuba, for instance, the easiest example is Havana. Like I mentioned before, there is every example of architecture, architectural style that has taken place in the last 500 years in that city, and no place in the whole of the Western Hemisphere can we find that.
The book is The Splendor of Cuba, 450 Years of Architecture and Interiors. Thank you so much for compiling these photographs for us, those of us who would never be able to travel to the places that you've been to see what you've seen. Thank you for sharing this with us.
And thank you, Barbara. I appreciate you having me.
You're welcome. You have a wonderful day, sir.